Welcome. Today we're going to take a look at people whose plans sounded ridiculous from the start and somehow became even worse at the end. From 4 men hanging beneath a helicopter for the world's biggest swing, to a woman swept away by a giant promotional kite, ending the day in the craziest way possible. It was the 18th of September, 2021, out in Slate Canyon, Utah, a wide open stretch of desert with big red rock walls and nothing but dry heat and dust for miles. It's the kind of place where sound just carries because there's nothing to stop it, and that morning a bunch of people had already gathered on the overlooks with their phones out, waiting. The guy everyone came to watch was Jasper King, 31 years old. An outdoor adventure YouTuber who built his whole channel on doing stuff nobody else would try. Always needed the next video to be bigger than the last one. And this time he wanted to pull off what he called the world's largest human helicopter swing. 4 guys hanging underneath a helicopter while it swung them out over the canyon. Jasper wasn't a reckless idiot in the way people usually picture it. He actually planned things out. He just cut corners where he shouldn't have. Real helicopter suspension work needs special long-line gear stuffed with swivels and rigging built to handle bodies swinging around in the air. But Jasper, trying to save money, bought a regular industrial tow rope instead. One of those thick ones rated to hold a huge static weight. His friend Owen, a certified climbing instructor, warned him that a rope rated for pulling something heavy in a straight line isn't the same as one that can handle 4 guys swinging like a pendulum underneath a helicopter. Jasper brushed it off, said the math worked out fine since their combined weight was nowhere close to the rope's limit. Honestly, and I say this as someone who's watched a lot of these stunt videos, the second I hear the math worked out fine, I already know where the story is going. So the day comes, 4 of them. Jasper, Owen, videographer Eli, and creator Noah, all clipped into one single rope hanging below the helicopter. Drones are up, ground cameras rolling, and the helicopter lifts them off the ground and starts moving forward over the canyon. That's when things start going wrong. About 2 minutes into the flight, as the pilot shifts direction for a second pass, the 4 men start swinging back and forth beneath the helicopter like a pendulum. Every small correction adds more swing instead of settling it down. Because there's no swivel on the rope, the twisting builds with each pass, sending repeated shock loads through the attachment point while the rope saws back and forth against the steel connector above the men's heads. The combination of the dynamic loading and constant abrasion begins rapidly damaging the fibers. From the ground, spectators zoom in with their phones and start pointing out the rope. Looks like it's fraying near the top, but there's no way to warn the men in time. They're already roughly 120 feet above the canyon floor and moving. Within seconds, the rope splits apart completely. The 4 men separate slightly in the air as they fall, but Jasper, closest to the torn section, drops first and lands ahead of the others near a flat shelf of sandstone. He hits the rock head first. The impact causes a catastrophic skull fracture, breaks his neck, and shatters his pelvis. He dies almost instantly. Owen, Eli, and Noah hit the ground almost immediately afterward, thrown onto a sloping section scattered with dense brush and loose dirt that absorbs part of the impact. They survive with multiple broken bones, internal injuries, and severe trauma. And that's the thing that sticks with me. They built this whole thing around being the biggest, the most impressive, and it ended up being one guy's Amazon order rope deciding everybody's fate. Emergency crews who reached the canyon floor confirmed Jasper was pronounced dead at the scene, with the medical examiner's report listing blunt force trauma to the head and neck as the official cause of death. Investigators found nothing mechanically wrong with the helicopter. Their report concluded the rope failed under dynamic forces the static rating never accounted for. The manufacturer confirmed, on record, the product was never certified for lifting people. I don't think Jasper was trying to be careless. I think he genuinely believed a number printed on a rope label was the same thing as safety, and that gap is exactly what killed him. The failure got caught on camera from multiple angles, and aviation safety officials have since referenced the case in training materials, using it as a documented example of why human rigging can never be treated like a standard tow job. I thought Jasper's story was already hard to believe. and then I came across the next one. Because apparently, something as harmless as blowing bubbles can turn deadly. The next story proves that even something as harmless as a giant soap bubble can go terribly wrong. It was August 6th, 2019, during an afternoon street festival in Busan, South Korea. Food vendors had set up along the edge of the square, cooking on propane burners while visitors moved between the stalls. A small performance area had been cleared nearby for Sabrina Prescott, who was preparing to make a giant soap bubble in front of the crowd. Sabrina was 29 and worked as a street performer and online entertainer. She liked making simple things look bigger and stranger than people expected. Her plan that day was to create a bubble so huge that it would float over the festival for several seconds while people filmed it. A regular giant bubble can drift for a moment, but it will not rise very far. Sabrina wanted hers to hang above the crowd, so she used hydrogen to fill it instead of plain air. Hydrogen is lighter than air, which was why she thought it would work. It is also extremely easy to set on fire, which was the part she either ignored or did not fully understand. She had followed an online demonstration and tested the idea on a much smaller scale before the event. Nothing went wrong during those practice attempts, and that seemed to give her confidence. The festival organizers believed she was using a normal soap mixture. The nearby vendors had no reason to think a performer was about to release hydrogen near their open cooking flames. I honestly cannot get over the fact that the whole idea was to make a soap bubble fly a little longer. That was the reward she was risking everything for. Her assistant held the frame steady while Sabrina pulled the soap film across it. Once the film was wide enough, she began feeding hydrogen into the center. The bubble slowly expanded until it was several yards across. When it finally separated from the frame, it rose over the open part of the square, just high enough that people had to tilt their phones upward to follow it. Sabrina stayed directly below and slightly behind it, holding the frame while watching the bubble drift. At first, the wind carried it away from the crowd. Then the breeze shifted it toward the food stalls along the edge of the festival. It did not rush over there. It moved slowly, giving people the impression that it was still under control. As the bubble drifted, its soap skin became thinner. The hydrogen inside began leaking through weak spots in the film. Because hydrogen is lighter than air, the leaking gas rose around the bubble as it moved. At the same time, the bubble was getting closer to a vendor's propane cooking burner, which had an open flame beneath a pan. The bubble passed within a few feet of the stall. Hydrogen leaking from the lower side of the bubble reached the heat and flame from the burner. It ignited almost immediately. The fire raced back through the gas around the bubble, and the soap film burst at the same moment. The bubble did not slowly burn away. Instead, it produced a brief flash of fire as the hydrogen ignited and the soap film vanished, almost entirely. Sabrina was still standing only a few feet from it, close enough that the sudden burst of heat and flame hit her chest, neck, arms, and clothing before she could step back. Her assistant and nearby vendors moved away from the heat, while people in the crowd scattered from the stall area. To me, this is what makes the story so hard to believe at first. A bubble should be one of the safest things in the world, but she turned one into a floating fire hazard beside a row of grills. A vendor grabbed a fire extinguisher, and another person used a second one moments later. The flames on Sabrina's clothing were put out quickly, but she had already suffered severe burns. She was also struggling to breathe after inhaling hot smoke and burning gas. Festival staff kept people back while emergency crews were called, and Sabrina was taken away for treatment. Her burns covered much of her upper body, and the heat had badly damaged her airway. She died later from the injuries caused by the fire. Officials examined the performance area after the festival and confirmed the propane burner had been operating normally. Their findings showed that hydrogen leaking from the weakening bubble had reached the burner flame and ignited. The official death record listed fatal burn injuries and smoke inhalation as the cause of her death. Festival organizers later banned any combustible gas from public performances. I don't think Sabrina woke up expecting to put herself in danger. I think she saw a trick online, wanted a bigger version for her audience, and forgot that fire doesn't care whether something looks fun on video. A floating bubble doesn't seem like something that could end a life, but the next story starts with something just as ordinary. A piano that only had to make it a few blocks down the road. It was November 3rd, 2016, on a steep residential street in San Francisco, California. A concert grand piano was about to be moved several blocks downhill without professional movers because the people handling it believed the slope would do most of the work for them. The piano belonged to Norlin Callahan, 34, a concert pianist who had recently bought it from an antique dealer. She loved older instruments and was excited to bring this one to her apartment, where she planned to have it restored. A moving crew was available a few days later, but Norlin did not want to wait. 3 musician friends agreed to help, thinking the job would be manageable if they took it slowly. Their plan was to place the piano on heavy furniture dollies, wrap guide straps around it, and walk it down the hill. It sounded practical indoors, where the piano was not moving yet, but a concert grand weighs well over 1,000 pounds, much of that weight coming from the cast iron frame inside it. Furniture dollies can move heavy things across a flat floor. They cannot safely control a piano gathering speed on a steep street. None of them had planned where they would stop if it picked up speed. They were relying on their grip, the straps, and the belief that 4 adults could hold back something far heavier than all of them. The route also gave them almost no room to correct a mistake. Parked cars lined parts of the street, the curb ran along one side, and every foot downhill gave the piano more speed before they could decide what to do next. Norlin stayed close because she did not want the piano drifting toward a parked car or scraping against the curb. She was focused on protecting the instrument she had just bought, not realizing that standing near its downhill side would put her directly in its path if the dollies failed. I've carried enough awkward furniture in my life to know that downhill is not automatically easier. Sometimes downhill just means the heavy thing gets to decide where everybody goes. Norlin stood at the lower end of the piano, holding a guide strap. Her friends stayed beside and behind it, ready to steer and slow it. When they first rolled it from the curb, it moved at a careful pace. But as soon as the wheels reached the steeper part of the street, the piano began pulling away from them. The group tried to slow it by leaning back against the straps. Instead, they were forced to walk faster. The dollies rattled across cracks in the pavement, and the piano began to sway slightly from side to side. Neighbors noticed what was happening and stepped outside. A few held up their phones, partly because it was unusual to see a grand piano rolling down a hill, and partly because it looked like nobody had a real way to stop it. I would have been worried the second that piano started moving faster than the people beside it. A 1,000-pound instrument does not need to be moving very fast before it becomes something you cannot reason with. Near the curb, one of the front dolly wheels dropped into a storm drain opening. That side of the piano stopped sharply, while the rest of its weight continued downhill. The piano turned sideways. The remaining dollies bent and collapsed under the sudden shift in weight. The guide strap slipped free from the group's hands. Norlin was still at the downhill end, close to the piano, when its weight tipped toward her. She had no time or space to move clear. The piano fell across her chest and lower body, pinning her against the pavement. Her friends called for help, and neighbors rushed over, but nobody could lift it. Firefighters arrived with hydraulic lifting tools and raised the piano enough for responders to reach Norlin. The piano had compressed her chest so severely that she could not breathe. It had also fractured her pelvis and caused massive internal bleeding. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner attributed Norlin's death to fatal crushing injuries from the fallen piano. The documented injuries included severe chest compression, pelvic fractures, and internal bleeding. The piano was eventually removed by professional movers, while Norlin's friends, who escaped with only minor injuries, later told investigators they never imagined the instrument would become impossible to control. I kept thinking that nothing heavier than that piano could surprise me. Then I got to a beach where something made of nothing but fabric turned just as dangerous. It was May 21st, 2022, at Cannon Beach, Oregon, where an advertising agency had set up a beach promotion near a rocky stretch of shoreline. The plan was to launch a huge branded kite for photos and video, but the wind had been getting stronger and less steady as people gathered on the sand. Jenna Montgomery was 25 and worked as a marketing designer for the agency. She had helped with the campaign and wanted the launch to look impressive. The kite was nearly 40 feet wide, made from lightweight fabric that would fill with air and lift high enough for people across the beach to notice it. This was not the sort of kite a person could casually hold like a toy. Once the wind filled it, the fabric could pull with the force of a moving vehicle. An experienced kite flyer, who was at the event, saw the gust building and advised the group to wait. The wind was not steady enough for a safe launch. The agency had brought the kite because they wanted people to stop, look, and share pictures online. Co-workers had spent time laying it out neatly on the sand, making sure the company design faced the right direction once it was in the air. By the time the warning came, a small crowd had formed, and the group did not want to take everything down without getting the footage. Jenna and her co-workers decided to go ahead anyway. They had already set up the display, people were watching, and they did not want to pack everything away without getting the photos they came for. Jenna put the control straps around both wrists because she was worried the kite would be blown away before the launch was finished. There was no fast way for her to break free if the straps tightened. The part that gets me is that they were trying to keep the kite from getting away, so they made sure Jenna could not get away from the kite. Co-workers spread the fabric out behind her on the sand. Jenna faced the open beach and held the straps while people nearby took out their phones. At first, the kite lay flat. Then an offshore gust rushed into the canopy and filled it completely. The pull came all at once. Jenna's arms were yanked forward, and the straps cinched tighter around her wrists. She tried to pull her hands free, but the tension had locked the straps in place. The kite dragged her across the sand before anyone standing nearby could grab her. Her co-workers ran after her. Jenna dug her heels into the beach and tried to turn her body sideways, but the kite kept catching new gusts. It lifted her several feet into the air, dropped her, then pulled her forward again. Each time she hit the sand, the straps tightened, and the kite gained another stretch of open beach ahead of her. The wind carried her toward the rocks at the edge of the beach. Lifeguards and bystanders moved after her, but the kite was pulling Jenna faster than they could safely reach her. People watching had started out filming a company stunt, but now they were backing away from the path of the kite and calling for help. Jenna's feet struck a large boulder first. The sudden stop threw her upper body forward into the exposed rocks. Her head and chest took the impact, leaving her with catastrophic injuries. The kite did not stop when she hit the boulder. Wind still filled the fabric, and it dragged her over the rocky ground until the canopy finally collapsed against the shoreline and lost its pull. Lifeguards reached her moments later, but the injuries caused by the dragging and impact could not be survived. What I find so hard to accept is that a warning had already been given. They had the chance to cancel a photo shoot, but instead they treated a giant wind-powered object like a harmless decoration. The medical examiner determined that Jenna died from fatal blunt force trauma caused by being dragged and thrown into the rocks. Event organizers later changed their rules for oversized kites, requiring trained launch crews and a release system that could separate a person from the kite immediately. Have you ever lost a game and thought that you could have done that better? That's exactly where our next story begins, and one stubborn decision changes everything. It was April 24th, 2018, and Trevor Ellsworth was standing in an escape room in Phoenix, Arizona, one of those strip mall businesses with painted brick walls and prop furniture bolted to the floor so nothing walks off with the customers. Maintenance work had been going on in the building that week, though none of the visitors gave it much thought. Trevor was 27, a sales representative, and the kind of guy who genuinely could not let a loss go. Whether it was a card game at lunch or trivia night at a bar, he needed to win, or at least convince everyone the game was somehow broken. He was only there that night because his coworkers dragged him along for a random Friday hangout, and from the second the clock started, he was treating the puzzles like a personal grudge match, snapping at people to hurry up and muttering that the clues didn't make sense. The group ran out of time and lost. Trevor spent the next few minutes insisting the puzzles were too easy and the room was rigged to waste time on purpose, arguing with the employee who came in to reset things, even though nobody else in the group seemed to care that much. Half joking, half serious, he said he'd beat the building instead since the puzzles clearly weren't going to give him the win. Staff had already unlocked the exit for them, so leaving was never actually the problem. What Trevor wanted was to find his own way out, some kind of shortcut the room designers never intended, just to prove he'd outsmarted the place even after losing fair and square. I've met guys exactly like this, the type who will invent a whole new competition just so they can still walk away saying they won something. That's when he spotted a loose ceiling panel above one of the rooms. one of the ones the technician had pulled down earlier and hadn't gotten around to replacing yet. Trevor climbed onto a bookshelf prop before anyone realized what he was actually planning to do, and by the time the employee standing across the room started moving toward him, Trevor had already pushed the panel aside and pulled himself up into the gap. His friends, thinking this was one more bit for the camera, kept filming, assuming the night was about to get one more laugh out of it rather than anything dangerous. Honestly, if a guy can lose an escape room and still find a way to make the night about proving a point, that tells you everything about how his brain works. What Trevor didn't know was that space above the ceiling wasn't attic storage. It was a working maintenance area full of ductwork, wiring, and metal framing holding up light ceiling panels, none of it built to carry a person's weight. He started crawling forward on his hands and knees, making it only a few feet past the opening toward the section where the technician had been working earlier that day, the same spot with panels still missing and stacked to the side. The metal framing beneath him began sagging almost immediately, groaning quietly under weight it was never designed to hold, and within seconds the grid buckled completely. He dropped about 12 feet straight down into the mechanical room below. His chest caught a steel duct support partway down, which knocked him sideways before his head slammed into the concrete floor. The fall fractured his skull and broke his neck, both injuries fatal almost instantly, and the impact against the duct support broke several ribs, puncturing his lungs. Responders reached him within minutes, but there was nothing left to do by that point. And I think that's the part that really sums up the whole night. He technically never even lost the game he was playing against himself, because nobody else knew that game existed. Investigators confirmed the maintenance space had never been open to customers, and that staff had warned Trevor before he climbed, but he moved too quickly for anyone to stop him. Authorities found no evidence of wrongdoing by the business, though it later installed permanent barriers over every ceiling access point to prevent similar incidents. Trevor refused to leave the way everyone else did. Up next is someone who makes the exact same mistake in a completely different place. It was July 30th, 2017, at a mirror maze on the Blackpool seafront in England. Behind one section of the maze, workers were renovating a staff-only area. Visitors could not normally reach it because the maze walls separated it from the public rooms. Chloe Hensley was 26, a travel vlogger visiting the attraction with her 28-year-old boyfriend, Brian Guzman. The couple liked filming the parts of their trips that felt messy and funny, especially when things didn't go as planned. But after getting turned around in the maze several times, Chloe was no longer having much fun. She wanted to get out fast, and she wanted to do it in a way that would look clever on camera, while Brian laughed and told her they could just keep looking for the exit. The maze had tall mirrored walls, but they stopped short of the ceiling. Chloe noticed the gap above one wall and decided she could climb over it instead of finding the regular exit. Brian started recording, thinking she would drop into another section of the maze and make a joke about beating the attraction. I have been stuck in those places before, where every corner sends you right back to the same spot. But I would rather walk in circles for an hour than climb over something that was clearly built to keep me where I am. An attendant spotted Chloe climbing and told her to come down. A nearby cleaner also shouted for her to stop, but Chloe ignored them. She climbed over the wall and dropped to the other side. Brian called after her, then climbed over before anyone could stop him. Instead of another maze room, Chloe dropped into a narrow, dim hallway. Brian climbed down after her. There were no mirrors, no decorations, and no signs for guests. The floor was dusty, with scattered renovation materials along the wall. Chloe hurried farther down the hallway while Brian followed a few steps behind, urging her to turn around. At the end of the hallway was a service shaft that dropped nearly 3 stories to a concrete floor. Workers had protected the shaft from the maintenance entrance with barriers and warning signs. But Chloe and Brian had entered from the opposite direction, a side nobody expected customers to reach. From where they stood, stacked materials and the low light hid the opening. Near the edge of the shaft, a loose plywood sheet rested across some construction materials. It wasn't secured. It had only been placed there to cover supplies, not to serve as a walkway. In the dim light, Chloe mistook it for part of the hallway floor. Chloe stepped onto the plywood. The board shifted almost immediately. She tried to pull her foot back, but the sheet slid off the materials supporting it and tipped into the open shaft. She lost her balance and fell through the gap. Following just a few steps behind, Brian failed to notice that the plywood had already fallen away. In the dim light, he stepped into the now exposed opening and plunged into the shaft after her. Chloe struck the concrete head first, suffering catastrophic injuries. Brian plunged after her, striking part of the shaft wall before hitting the concrete below. Staff followed the route behind the maze after realizing both of them had never entered another public room. They found the displaced plywood, saw the open shaft, and called for emergency help. Crews arrived within minutes, but neither Chloe nor Brian survived the fall. The coroner ruled that both died from catastrophic injuries caused by the fall. Their families later explored legal action against the attraction, but investigators concluded Chloe and Brian had entered a clearly restricted renovation area after ignoring repeated warnings from staff. Authorities found no evidence of criminal wrongdoing by the business, though the attraction later extended its maze walls and installed anti-climb barriers to prevent anyone from accessing the area again.